right, on this rainy dawn, you are listening to Writers of the Dawn. This is Jay.
This is Stu. Thanks for joining us.
Today, we're going to talk about plots and subplots.
Otherwise known as A stories, B stories, C stories, D stories. Just the stories within your story. The different threads, the different goals that you have to weave together.
And this is why a lot of times we think about stories as a tapestry that you weave together, because in telling one story, you're inevitably telling more than one story. And so this is something that you may not even realize, because in the conclusion of any successful story, all those things are tied together. So your goal is to make it feel seamless.
Yeah, and this is I mean, even before we dive into this, the question is, do you need subplots? And I think an answer is you don't need subplots. Like, your story is not going to be worse if you have no subplots. But subplots are a way of adding additional tension and thereby heightening the resolution of your entire story. So in most cases, you're going to want a subplot. There's also, and I don't know how true this idea is, but if you don't have any subplots, the reader will get bored, or the viewer will get bored in the movie if there aren't any subplots, because you're seeing the same tension on the same goals without any kind of break to have something else happen. Mm-hmm. So you could fatigue the reader, fatigue the viewer.
Well, and it's also, subplots are a good way to add depth to your story. This is where you see a lot of romances added into an action plot, because it's not necessarily part of the plot, but it's part of that character. It's part of the environment, and it's adding an overall tension, like Stu said, to your work. So when I think of subplots, I don't necessarily seek out, when I'm writing, to write subplots, but there are inevitably things that you write about that you want to explore more that aren't directly tied to the plot, that you will later tie into the plot. This is, again, the Chekhov's gun idea. If you introduce a concept, you need to make sure that concept is part of the resolution.
Yeah, and another thing, too, is that if you are writing a sufficiently interesting story, you're going to have more than one character, right?
Right.
So those characters, those additional characters, maybe they're not viewpoint characters, or maybe they are viewpoint characters and you're switching viewpoints. Those additional characters, besides the primary protagonist, they all have their own goals, and they all have their own objectives in mind. And so you're going to create a subplot to explore that, and also let their character be exposed in a sense. So subplots are an opportunity for you to create exposition for other characters, to expose your setting in additional ways. Subplots can accomplish a lot of goals to enhance the overall effect of a story.
Right, like a subplot could also be a way to develop the main plot. So with The Way of Kings, we have these interlude chapters where we explore a character's past, and that character's past ends up informing the actions in the present.
Yeah, so that's actually a really, really good technique, is that as you're approaching in the main narrative some plot event, you provide the information that's necessary for that plot event to be contextualized properly. Right. Around the same point, either right afterwards or right before. Mm-hmm. So in some cases you can have a plot point and the reader goes, what was that? And then you have an interlude and you're like, now I understand the context of that. And that kind of gives you an additional bit of tension and resolution for that particular moment in the events of the plot.
So I think a great study would be if we talk about Overnight Sensations, because this is a movie that we worked on for quite a while. and it has 3 really good separate plots. Overnight Sensations was a screenplay about a heavy metal band who makes it big by writing kind of a one-off pop tune that becomes huge in like the early 90s.
Yeah, so yeah, the inspiration, of course, was a band called Sugar Ray, which started off as this hard rock band, or this metal influence band. I would call them actually a new metal band. And then as they recorded this one-off tune called Fly, and it became a huge hit. And so after that, they got a lot of pressure to completely change their sound, which they did.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of inspiration. Is like, what do you do if you're writing in one style and there's this unexpected success in this other style? You're going to feel very pressured to change what you do. And for metalheads, that's like a change of identity. That's like changing your sex. It's like, you should now be a woman. It's like, but I don't want to be a woman.
Right. So how the band as a unit reacting to this success was kind of the A story. And then within that, the B story was the main character's interaction with his live-in girlfriend, who
gets pregnant.
And you know, the characters are obviously mismatched. They shouldn't be together. Then she gets pregnant. They're stuck together, and so dealing with that conflict on top of, you know, a musical identity conflict added a lot of tension to the story, and it also influenced the character to want to move in this more popular music direction, because now suddenly he's not thinking about his artistic integrity so much anymore. He's thinking about the success of his family.
Yeah.
And so you see that this subplot really pushes the decision-making of the character. Now, within that, we also had these internal relationships within the band, which made yet another plot that created tension with each other that ultimately would only be resolved through the resolution of these other main plots. And all of these really pushed the story forward, gave a lot of opportunity for jokes, and what was really important about the plot is this is a comedy. The plot needed to be a really good plot, but it also needed to have opportunity to hang jokes on. And this is something I think is important about plot, is your plot isn't necessarily where the comedy is going to come from in a comedy. That doesn't mean that it can't, because situations can be hysterical, and you're going to put your characters in funny situations. But that doesn't necessitate that the comedy has to come from the plot. It's always nice to have jokes that go along with the plot and they add to the plot. Imagine the plot is your skeleton, or the plot is your Christmas tree, and the jokes are ornaments that you're hanging on the Christmas tree.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. You really don't want, like, the best impacted jokes are happening within the context of whatever your story is and whatever you've established for your characters. So, an example of a bad joke is Peter Griffin fighting a chicken. Right, like the chicken comes out of nowhere and Peter Griffin fights it for no reason. Now, you laugh because it comes out of nowhere and has nothing to do with it. But there's nothing, like, the funniness is that it didn't have anything to do with it. You can't just do that for an entire movie, right? Yeah, people are just going to walk out of it. They're going to think it's retarded. And they're, you know, one time that something unexpected and unexplained happens, it can be funny. But beyond that, it's not going to ever be funny again.
Yeah, the comedy comes from the unexpected. So when we're thinking about one thing that I think is funny is two funny guys sitting in a car, not telling any jokes and not being funny.
Yeah. Well, what I thought was funny was, I mean, one of my favorite funny things was that episode of South Park that we all thought would be the last episode of South Park.
Yeah.
Where it was like the whole second half of the episode, there's no jokes. It's just Stan's parents getting divorced.
Yeah.
And I had never laughed so hard in an episode of South Park in my life. And like, why was it funny? Is because it was not funny. Like, I know that's bizarre to think about, but because it wasn't funny, it was like the biggest joke of them all.
Yeah, it's the unexpected.
It's just like it ends on a and because of the context of the show, because it had been censored with the Muhammad episodes, you're like, this is the end of South Park, and they just ended on this incredible low note, which to me is just genius. I don't know, I just laughed so hard at that they just made it not funny at the end, to like kind of say like, farewell guys, we're not giving you anything good at the end.
Yeah.
To hell with you all.
Yeah, that was really, really funny. So, I guess we got a little bit off there, but
yeah, the point is, okay, so let's talk about technical things about weaving in subplots. You can't start your story with all the subplots rolling along. Right? Like, they're like threads and you're weaving a tapestry, and you have to put in one thread at a time. So you need to start with your main conflict, whatever it's going to be, right? So you start with your exposition, and through the exposition you discover the main conflict. And then you add in these other conflicts, you add in these other goals as you go, as you acquire characters, as you do different things. Really typical screenwriting setup is, the A story goes from the first minute to the last minute. The B story starts a third of the way through, and the C story starts. The C story is the final third of the movie. That's the way a lot of people like to think of it. It's that we have the A story is it's the main plot goal. The B story is the secondary conflict that's introduced to sort of heighten the tension. And then the C story is that the little thing, the events that happen to resolve all the stuff at the end. Something new that gets introduced in the final act of the movie to help bring everything to its actual conclusion.
Yeah, and this is kind of a three act idea. So if we're thinking about cinema and screenwriting, which is kind of where my head is right now, your A story needs to be, the conflict of your A story needs to be fully fleshed out by page 10 of your screenplay. About the 10-minute mark of the movie, you need to know what the problem is,
what the goal is,
and then you have the shenanigans portion of the movie, where basically you're developing that problem. You're also exploring the B plot, and then about the end of the second act, you have kind of a major resolution, followed immediately by a bigger conflict that it results from the resolution of those first two, and then the final third of the movie is you kind of working through that. And these are, and as a musician, I think about it musically. This is kind of that end of the second act is kind of the half cadence. It's the dissonant resolution, awaiting the final authentic resolution, where you think things are resolved and you realize no, things aren't really resolved. We have to keep going. But it allows you to it allows the audience to relax enough to accept the new tension, and that's really important. You don't want to your plot can't just be tension, because what ends up happening is you desensitize your audience. So you have to have some resolution along the way in order to keep the audience moving forward. Because the story is all about your audience. You have to make sure that your audience is engaged. And if you never allow them that release of tension, it's not going to be that effective.
Yeah, you can, like I said, you can fatigue. You can fatigue your audience that way. So sometimes it's good to give them a little bit of relief and give them something else to focus on, so that you're not like pounding home nothing but tension until the very end.
Now you can always break that. Rules are kind of meant to be broken once you understand the use of them.
You were talking about what people typically do.
Yeah.
And why they do it. Like I said, you don't need subplots, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, subplots must be dropped depending on the format that you're working with and the length of time, the length of whatever work you're doing. So, if you were intending to write a 5,000 to 10,000 word short story, you really shouldn't have subplots. Like, that shouldn't even be on the plate.
Yeah.
Because 5,000 to 10,000 words is a single sitting of reading. A reader's just going to read straight through that and enjoy the story and not think any more of that. You don't want to add subplots because in 5,000 to 10,000 words, you don't have enough space to explore those subplots and to fully resolve those subplots. If you're writing like microfiction, there's absolutely no room for subplots. You need to have a setup, conflict, and then a resolution. Bang, 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 bang.
Yeah.
And hopefully have a little bit of characterization in there. Because that's the other part too, is if you're writing a short story, you need to have probably just like one main character that you explore, one main conflict you explore, set it up, create the tension, add the uncertainty, and then create the resolution. And don't worry about a subplot. In fact, avoid it. If you're writing a novella, well, you can have 1 or 2 extra subplots depending on what you want. I think novellas translate kind of into movies. Movies have way less story than a book does. So a movie, it's the same idea. You have a main plot and maybe 1 to 2 subplots, a B story, maybe a C story if you have enough time. And then for a full-length novel, you can have many subplots depending on how many characters you have and how baroque you want the texture to be. So if you have a very, if you have a book that's very much like a feud, which I have written a book like that, where there are 3 to 4 stories going on at the same time that come to one conclusion at the end. You need a lot of space to do that. You're not going to do it in a 100-page novel.
Yeah.
You can do it in a 500-page novel. You're not going to do it in a 100-page novel. It's not going to happen.
Well, this is one of the reasons I really don't care for most, especially popular cinema these days.
Cinema's gone downhill.
They're cut so tight.
Yeah, in this particular, definitely in this way.
Yeah, you don't have the room for the plot and especially the subplots that really make a rich story. You really, excuse me, you really only have time to explore one main idea, and even then, it feels like you don't have enough time to explore it. I just feel like all these Marvel movies coming out they're one plot that is just barely developed with one-liners on top of it, and you don't really see, you don't get much more than one character to develop, and it's just, it's kind of boring.
Yeah, the plot part of it gets real thin, but it's not just it's really not just Marvel movies. I was thinking of when I've really come to notice this over the years, and one of the things I noticed is if you watch Disney movies have a really, really particular format since the late 80s of really, really specific elements that are always being used. They have a main plot. There's always 2 sidekicks, 3 sidekicks, and then there's these little B and C stories about those sidekicks and what they think. So I was watching like Planes with my niece or something years ago, and there was this little subplot with one plane like being in love with this other plane, but there's so little screen time of it that you're left going like, I don't know who either of those characters were or why we were watching them try to do this romantic dance in a scene and a half.
Yeah.
So the movie was, cut down to be like 80 minutes.
Yeah.
And that Disney format from the late 80s and early 90s was made for like 95-minute movies.
Yeah.
So that loss of 15 to 20 minutes, you have to get rid of that subplot because you simply don't have the time on screen to tell it and to develop those characters or to make the audience care or understand why you're showing it to them.
And this is part of the business. We see movie times getting cut shorter and shorter so that they can have more screenings in the theaters so that there's more opportunity to sell tickets. And it's a really, from a writer's perspective, it's unfortunate because you can't have this robust story you might want, but it's the realities of the business. and instead of trying to conform reality to your expectations, you ought to do the opposite. Conform your expectations to reality.
It's not just screen time. It's not just screen time that makes the subplots just like be awful and ineffective. Because if you watch a Marvel movie, sometimes they're long. They're like 2.5 hours long.
Yeah.
But in that 2.5 hours, there's somehow less story than there used to be in a 2-hour movie.
Right, because most of these are just like CGI fests.
Yeah, it's just like CGI flying all over the place. It's about stimulating the audience, not about delivering them a story.
And this is something that I've said a lot in the past. Is I would much rather watch a bad sci-fi movie that makes me think, even if it makes me try and understand what they're trying to say because they're being ineffective at it, than watch a 95-minute pop flick that's just stimulation. Because for me, it's just not interesting. For me to watch, Iron Man fly around and like they lift up this part of the island and they're gonna smash, whatever happened in Avengers 2.
Yeah.
I don't even remember. I just remember there's an island or something. And why don't I remember? It's because it didn't make an impact on me. There wasn't enough plot for it to leave me.
Yeah, the story was kind of lost in the margins. Like the story was told in the margins between explosions.
Yeah.
Rather than explosions being something. I mean, like the movie's so stimulating that you can't really even recall the plot for a certain amount of time afterwards. And I've asked people, I'm like, what's the plot to this movie? And they're like, oh God, I'm trying to remember. It's like, okay. Yeah. It's like, oh, I remember I liked the movie, but I don't remember what happened in the movie. Whereas when there's movies I see that I've seen them one time and I remember the story forever.
Yeah.
We watched Valhalla Rising one time and I remember everything about that movie.
Yeah, everything about it. Well, and I recall the one sci-fi film I'm thinking of in particular was called Mr. Nobody. And frankly, it was awful, but I remember every bit of it because I actually really enjoyed watching it. And it was about basically the last human to be mortal and die. And so it's told through flashbacks of his life as he's like approaching death, and the media is basically covering his death because it's so odd that someone has chosen to still be mortal. Which is kind of a cool idea. I think it was executed terribly, but I remember it so vividly that I could explain it to you right now, what was happening. And this is what I mean. And this is an engaging plot that makes you think. It doesn't hold your hand as an audience member. That's another thing, that when you're writing your plot, try your best not to just heavy-handedly explain what you're doing. It's like explaining a joke. Yeah,
it's like the stilted dialogue we talked about.
Yeah,
it's like the characters come out and they're like, "No, this is happening."
Once that sun is gone, the planet's gonna explode, or whatever happened in Rogue One.
Yeah.
Not Rogue One.
Force Awakens.
Force Awakens. So these are things. You want your audience to be able to infer the plot, not be just like heavy-handedly told. If you're writing a detective novel, obviously you're trying to uncover the mystery.
Yeah.
But uncovering the mystery is what's fun, and you don't want to just say, "And now he went to uncover the mystery." Right? That would be an example of stilted dialogue.
Yeah.
Right?
And another technical thing is that the less time you're going to spend on that subplot, the simpler it needs to be, and the quicker the resolution and the more understandable and all that lovely good stuff. So, if you're looking back at, the screenplay format, that third act where you're really hitting the C story, that C story's got to be pretty simple and straightforward, because you have the least amount of time on it. So the less time that you are spending on a plot or a subplot, the less complex it needs to be, and the less events need to happen to resolve it.
Yeah, and that's usually why the C plot, especially in movies, is most often a race against time. You don't have to explain much. It's like, if we don't get there in 10 minutes, that planet is going to explode, right? And so then it's just a race against time.
Yeah.
You don't have to explain much.
Yeah. There's not that much to explain, and that's ideal. And if you find yourself writing a subplot that has too much intrigue, you need to rethink the subplot, because then it just becomes another main plot. And you can actually have more than one primary plot. You can have a total view if you want to do that. But it's not easy to accomplish.
Yeah, but that can't be you can't introduce something like that in the third act.
Yeah, you're not going to introduce the third act is the third theme of your contrapuntal composition. It is not, it's not an entirely new symphony happening while the other one is trying to resolve. You can't do that. Or when you do it, you're going to end up cutting essential parts out of that subplot that's going to ruin it, not make it make any sense.
Yeah. So if you find yourself doing that, and you really like that story, you need to rethink that thread, because if we go back to the tapestry metaphor, what's going to end up happening is that thread is going to be longer than you have room for to get to the end of the tapestry. So you need to find a way to weave that more closely to the beginning. Yeah,
either put it closer to the beginning or simplify it, or make that its own book and just don't worry about it. I think that's about it for today.
Yeah,
We're out of time.
I think we covered some good stuff today. So, this is Jay. You can find me at MatthewJWellman.com.
This is Stu. You can find me at DavidVStewart.com and DBSPress.com. You can, of course, email the podcast with my email, Stu at DavidVStewart.com. And this has been Riders of the Dawn.
Thank you guys very much. Have a great day.